As I thought about what I would speak on today within the bounds of our theme for the year, Faith for a Fractured World, I couldn't help but pause on the word fractured every time. During my high school years, there was this one summer that was incredibly dry, and I remember it well for one reason and one reason only. There were literal fractures in the ground in certain parts of the state of Nebraska because the soil was that dry. It had been that long since it had rained. There were literal fissures. I have a picture on my phone to this day of it, so if anybody wants to see it, come find me after this. And that image that is on my phone is what has been floating around in my head for months as I have thought about this topic. As I pondered on this image, I found myself wondering, what is in the fractures? My brain prompted this question due to the imagery of a fracture. A fracture split what once was in two. It creates a division, two new things from what once was whole. In his book, Rainbow Theology, Patrick Chang talks about the concept of middle space. For Chang, this middle space is where queer people of color find themselves, and not by choice. You see, there's this sense of belonging when you're with people who share certain identities with you. But for queer people of color, there's a disconnect. Chang speaks about how in Asian spaces, he feels his queerness is overlooked or dismissed, but in queer spaces, he feels his Asianness is overlooked or dismissed. There's homophobia in his Asian spaces and racism in his queer spaces. This out-of-place feeling in spaces where someone should feel included due to shared identity is the middle space. Now, I present this concept not as someone who understands this middle space in the way Chang describes. Obviously, I am white. I recognize that. But I present it as someone who understands what it feels like to be between two spaces, out of place in both. For at least half of my life, I have felt as if I am between a version of myself that has existed out of necessity and a version that is itching to come alive, a person whom I have not fully met yet. Over these last 3 years, I have lived through a pivotal time in my journey of becoming. For me, this has been a time of being in the middle space, the fractures of my own life. So I set up this idea of middle space, the space between, as a piece of imagery. But I still wonder, what is in the fractures? While our passage speaks of fasting and worship, I hope you all will allow me some freedom to utilize its message for a different context. In this text from Isaiah, the prophet is speaking to a group of people, and this specific group is made up of those people who have extreme piety, living out the rituals and practices to a T. But in their piety, they miss the whole point of following God: compassionate justice. This is why we see the words in our text pointing to a necessity for justice for all people, including those being addressed in the text. In this community of people, they have kept their practices and observances to the individual realm, eliminating joy in community, leading to coldness, and calculating self-interest in their communal interactions. Our country is at one of its most divided moments right now, hence the theme, Faith for a Fractured World. I don't think that this was selected in a vacuum void of context. And I want to make it clear, I'm not necessarily talking about political division, but division more broadly. There's heartbroken outrage on some sides and defense-first justification on others. And those tend to be with people who utilize power to shame, instill fear, and dehumanize those who are already at the bottom of the hierarchy of a system that has been built by white, heterosexual, cis men, a system that is not built for everyone. And many display the same coldness and callous self-interest as those being addressed in our text. But again, I ask the question I still have yet to answer. What is in the fractures? What happens in the fractures? And as I've thought about this question, I have found 3 possible answers. I'm certain there's more, but we're going to focus on these 3. So number 1, nothing. Perhaps Nothing happens in the fractures. We keep to ourselves. We wonder why nothing ever changes for the better. We wonder, like those addressed in our passage, why God does not see or notice our suffering. Perhaps we are destined to keep slowly fracturing as a society, creating more distance between the categories of us and them through inaction and lack of connection. But I don't necessarily think that only nothing happens. That doesn't quite make sense. There may be moments of nothingness or individuals choosing to do nothing, but that cannot be the sole thing happening in the fractures. There is way too much going on around us for that to be the case. So that brings us to number 2, an endless war. Perhaps the fracture is the battleground where opposing forces face off and fight to the death. Now, that is stark imagery, but with some of the rhetoric and name-calling, and as stated in our text, the pointing of the finger being thrown from all sides of the fractures, this possibility doesn't seem too unlikely. In this possibility, the fracture fractures further faster than in the first possibility. Don't worry, I'm going to say that again. That was a hefty alliteration. The fracture fractures further faster than if absolutely nothing was happening. In other words, the rate at which the fracture grows is exponentially larger compared to the first possibility. This is where we might find some of those people being addressed in our passage. While this, I think, is definitely a hefty chunk of what is going on in the fractures, I'm still certain there's more. That brings us to number 3, a meeting. And no, I'm not talking about a business meeting. Nobody likes those. Nobody likes those. I'm talking about the type of meeting in which we lay down our defenses and clothe ourselves with curiosity, a listening ear, and a posture of invitation. You see, conversations are happening in the fractures. Connections are being made between people who never would have thought they had anything in common. Relationships are being built on common understanding, no matter how small. People are daring to go to the space between what they know and what they don't, between who they've been and who they want to be, between what they see in the world currently and what they could see and want to see in the world in the near future. And I think there needs to be more of this third option. I also think this is what our passage is pointing us toward. But this third one, a third way, if you will, is also the hardest to do. Number 1 requires 0 effort. You just sit back and do nothing. Some people are sitting back and doing nothing. Number 2 typically doesn't require much work either. You have established opinions and beliefs, and you stick to them with 0 openness to hearing any new or opposing ideas, let alone trying to understand them. This leads to walls and barriers being built at the expense of human connection. Now, number 3 is hard and more often than not scary work. It requires a deep awareness of self. We're all fallible human beings. We all mess up and hurt others from time to time. That is just the unfortunate reality of being human. This awareness of self requires us to look inside and see where our shortcomings lie. I mean, the scriptures say don't point out the splinter in someone else's eye until you address the log in your own. We all have work to do on that, constantly, every day. And the thing that exists in all of us is that we don't know everything. We do not know everything. And once we truly admit and acknowledge that we do not and cannot know everything, we open ourselves up to that curiosity, to that listening ear, and that posture of invitation we need to clothe ourselves with. And most importantly, we can't do this work alone. We cannot do this work alone. Stepping into the fractures, the space between, is scary. And getting to the meeting might mean walking through the war first. Nobody wants to or should ever have to do that work alone. It's too hard to do it alone. Maybe the person you go through it with is somebody you meet along the way, someone who at first glance is nothing like you. But perhaps you are both willing to put in the work to heal the fracture. And healing the fracture doesn't begin with a plan to fix it. It doesn't begin with a plan to fix it. Healing the fracture begins with connection. Verses 6 and 7 of our passage say this: Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked to cover them and not to hide yourself from your own kin? The prophet is telling us exactly what we need to do to just begin to create divine community here on earth. Maybe it looks a little bit more like inviting your undocumented neighbors over for dinner and getting to know their story. Trust me, they have a story, and I am willing to bet it is one of hard work and perseverance. Maybe it looks like asking your queer classmate what makes them feel alive in dark times. All queer people have been through the darkest of valleys. Or maybe it looks like getting coffee with someone whose political beliefs differ from yours and chatting about your hobbies. It is possible to leave the politics at the door for the sake of getting to know the little things about a person, even if it's only for 5 minutes. Connection mends. Connection begins to make the fractures smaller. And I want to leave you with one more reminder from our text. We will be the repairer of the breaches. We will be the restorer of streets to live in. But first, we must dare to connect, to engage in those meetings of others. We must dare to go to the space between. Amen.